so we're going to talk about integer exponents. And the quotient rule. Now, integer exponents are when you have an exponent of 0, 1, or -1. If you have an exponent of 0, 3 to the 0 power, that is always equal to 1. It's always equal to 1. Let me show you on a calculator, and I don't have my scientific calculator with me, but it would give you the same answer. If I did 3 to the 0 power, it equals 1. If I did 10 to the 0 power, it equals 1. If I do anything to a 0 power, it equals 1. 2,567 to the power of 0, it equals 1. So, if you have a number to a power of 1, it's equal to that number. So if you have 6, that's the same as 6 to the first power. If you have x to the first power, that's the same thing as x. The tricky part is when you have a negative exponent. When you have a negative exponent, actually let's use a number that's easy to convert so I can show you what I'm talking about. So let's say that I had 4 to the -2. Whenever you have a negative exponent, it's equal to, nope, I don't want to use 4, I'm going to use 2. That'll make it easy to understand in just a second. Whenever you have a negative exponent, you can't have a negative exponent in math. The only time you can have a negative exponent is scientific notation. So you have to convert this to a positive exponent. To do that, you take its inverse. And then it becomes positive. And now what's 2 squared? 1/4. And I'm going to show you on my calculator how that works. So let's say that I had 1/4. The decimal equivalent of 1/4 is 0.25. If I wanted to change that back to a fraction, it'd be 1/4. So now I want to do 2 to the -2 power. So it equals 1/4. And that's because you can't have a negative exponent. It will always change it to a fraction. Now, if the negative's on the bottom, you have a whole different thing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's take a look at our 0 again and do some practices. 6 to the 0 is equal to what? 1. But what is -6 to the 0? And that is equal to -1. Now remember, that's because the negative stays in front, and it's just 6. Here it is on the calculator. -6 to the 0 is -1. If I would have put that in parentheses, that's when it would come out to be a +1. So let's talk about a negative exponent when it's already a fraction. So basically, remember we talked about earlier, this -3 has to go to both numbers. So this is actually 1 to the -3. and 7 to the negative 3. A negative exponent on top always goes to the bottom. A negative exponent on the bottom always goes to the top. So we have 7 over 1 to the third power. And it just flipped and became positive. Now we would do 7 to the third equals 343. And over 1 to the third is 1, so it would just be 343. But if you already have a fraction, it flips and becomes positive. Okay, let's do one more with a negative exponent. 7 to the negative 2. Remember, it becomes a fraction with the negative going to positive. Another way you can look at it is that the negative exponent is being bad and it's being sent to the basement. So then we have 1 over 49. All right, let's talk about the quotient rule. The quotient rule of exponents is when you're dividing. And it says, as long as the bases are the same, you subtract the exponents. And let me show you how that works. If I would have had x to the 5th over x squared, that's equal to x times x times x times x times x over x times x. Now, whenever you have the same thing on top and bottom, they simplify to be a whole number 1. So this simplifies to be 1, and this simplifies to be 1. And remember, 1 times 1 is just 1, so it's the same thing. What's the leftover? X to the third. So I don't want to do this for every problem, so as long as the bases are the same, all I have to do is subtract the exponents, and you get x to the third. Now, you always want to do your rules before you do any negatives and positives and moving things around. For example, let's say I had 2 to the negative 3 over 3 to the negative 2. Now, here's the thing. Can I simplify with the exponent rule? I cannot. And why? Because my bases aren't the same. In order for this to work, these would both have to be 2, or they would both have to be 3. So what I need to do now is flip them. Negative goes to the bottom to become positive. Negative goes to the top to become positive. And now I can simplify. 3 squared is 9. 2 to the third is 8. Okay? Let's try another one. This one's a little bit tricky. So remember, the bases are the same, so we subtract the exponents. So this would be w to the third minus, and it's what? It's a negative 8. So remember, even though this is a negative, we're subtracting it, which makes these two positive, which makes w to the 11th. Now, we can also look at that as negative exponent on the bottom goes to the top. Bases are the same. We add our exponents. We get the exact same answer for both. All right, let's look at this. Now, I can't do anything with combining these, but I do need to simplify it. Now, when I simplify it, it means that this goes to the bottom of a fraction to become positive, which means, what am I left with? X to the 6th. Now, do I write it like this? No, because what's x to the 6th times 1? So the x to the 6th stays on top, and the y to the 3rd stays on bottom. All right, let's do a little bit of harder one so you can see a whole bunch of different moving parts. So we have x to the negative third, y to the third, z to the negative fifth, over x to the negative 5, y squared, z to the negative fourth. Okay? So I don't want to do anything yet. The first thing I want to do is do my powers. Remember, each power to a power, you multiply. So this would become x negative 3 times negative 5 is a positive 15. 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. And then this would be z to the negative 5. Over on the bottom, this would be negative 5 times negative 4 is 20. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And this would be z to the negative 4. So now I'm going to look at my x's together, my y's together, and my z's together. This would be 15 minus 20. Y would be negative 15 minus negative 8. And z would be negative 5 minus negative 4. See, I almost did it right there. So now what's 15 minus 20? Negative 5. What is negative 15 plus 8? Negative 7. And then this is negative 5 plus 4, which would be negative 1. Which means they all have a negative exponent. So that means they all have to be written on the bottom of a fraction. What if there's nothing left to go on top? Remember, that's a 1. So that is simplified.